We start out as a single cell that divides repeatedly to give rise to all of the cells that make up the adult body. Now, within our bodies, those cells are grouped into tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that have similar structures and similar functions to them, and we do consider 4 primary tissues in the human body. Those tissues include epithelium or epithelial tissue, and that's primarily for covering. We also have connective tissue, which is going to be for support. We have nervous tissue for control, and then finally we have muscle tissue for movement. All of those tissues are going to associate together into different larger structures, which we do call organs. We'll talk about the organs later, but what we want to do right now is go over the details of the different tissue types. So first up is the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is also called epithelium, and this is lining, covering, and glandular tissue. The functions of this tissue are primarily protection, absorption, filtration, and secretion, because again, it is primarily a lining or a covering. Typical characteristics that we do see with epithelial tissue is that, first of all, they do tend to fit very closely together to form these continuous sheets. The second thing about epithelium is that the tissue's membranes always have one free or unattached surface or edge, where you don't have something else right there up next to it. Another feature is that the lower surface is going to rest on a basement membrane. That's a structureless material that is secreted by both the epithelial cells and then also the connective tissues that are going to be next to those cells. A fourth characteristic is that these epithelial tissues do not have any blood supply of their own. And then finally, they are going to be capable of regenerating quite easily. So that's what the epithelial tissues are. Now, if we talk about classes of epithelial tissues or how we actually name them, there's a couple different ways that we do name them. The first part is that we classify them as either being simple or stratified. And this is really how deep it happens to be, because simple epithelium is just going to be one layer of cells. And then when we're talking about stratified, there's more than one layer of cells. Anything over one layer, so 2 or more, would be considered stratified tissue. We can see the pictures of them right here. So the one on the top is your simple epithelium. So notice it's just one single layer there. And then the stratified, you can see we've got numerous layers. And in that particular picture, we've got 5 layers of cells in that stratified tissue. We can also classify the epithelial tissue according to the shape of the cells that are there. We have what's called squamous, cuboidal, and then also columnar. The shapes of them are listed below. You can see that the squamous are going to be very flattened cells, so almost like fish scales would be. The cuboidal are cube-shaped, and the columnar are going to be column-shaped, or very long and cylinder-shaped. Here you can see the different shapes and how they do compare. If we classify the epithelium tissue more, simple epithelium, so a single layer of cells, this is going to be primarily for absorption, secretion, and then also filtration. And here you can see an example of that. Simple squamous will be one layer of cells that are tightly fit together, and these are going to be very important in some cases for rapid diffusion. The lungs are a place where we do see this. We also see this in the capillaries, where they need to be able to get oxygen into those capillaries. Another type of simple epithelium is going to be the cuboidal type. This is very common in glands and ducts, and so you do see some examples of what those would look like here. Again, it's a single layer because it is simple, and cuboidal has to do with the fact that it's a cube-like shape. Simple columnar epithelium has the long cylinder cells, and these often produce mucus. And that type of cells, they are common in the digestive tract, so lining the digestive tract. And when we do have cells like this that produce that mucus, we call them goblet cells. So the goblet cells will produce the lubricating mucus that we do have in various body compartments. Now we have one type of epithelium that's not really simple and it's not really quite stratified. We call this pseudostratified epithelium. And this one contains columnar cells, but they're of different heights. So because they're of different heights, it makes it look like there's a number of layers there. This is something that we do find in the respiratory tract. And this is a fairly unusual type of epithelium. We're not going to see a whole lot of the pseudostratified. If we get into the actual stratified, the stratified has less of an absorptive function and it tends to be more of a protective function. So the fact that you have multiple layers there provides more of a cushioning. Stratified squamous epithelium contains several layers, and these are going to be found in layers or in areas that receive more abuse than others. So this would be in the mouth. We also have this in the esophagus. Our skin would also have the stratified squamous. You can see in this microscope image here that that stratified section can actually contain quite a few layers of the cells. It doesn't have to be just 2 or 3 layers of cells when it's stratified. It can be many. Stratified cuboidal epithelium typically consists of just 2 layers, and then if we're talking about the stratified column-shaped, this is typically going to contain cells that do vary in their overall size. These types are relatively rare, so when we are talking about the stratified, usually it is going to be the stratified squamous that we're looking at, and again, it's more of a protective cushioned function, and that's going to be in those high abuse areas. We also have what's called transitional epithelium. And transitional epithelium, what makes them unique is the fact that they can slide past each other. And when they do slide past each other, this is going to allow for stretching. And for some organs, stretching is really important. One primary place where we do see this is when we are talking about the urinary system and things like the bladder that do have to stretch quite a bit. The bladder is actually what we're looking at in this particular microscope image. And again, these cells are going to be able to slide past each other, and that's what makes them transitional. Our second type of tissue is connective tissue. Connective tissue has a primary role in support. It is going to be responsible for connecting together multiple body parts, and it is by far the most abundant body tissue type that we do have. Its overall functions include protecting, supporting, and then also binding together. Now, characteristics of connective tissue are, first of all, that it tends to be well vascularized. What this means is that there is a very good supply of blood that goes to these particular tissues. They're going to contain many different cell types. And then also, they're going to contain varying amounts of material outside of the cells. And what we mean by outside of the cells is outside of that plasma membrane or cell membrane. And that region that we find just outside of that is going to be called the extracellular matrix. So if we were to draw that right here, if this is the plasma membrane or the cellular membrane of my cell, so this is the plasma membrane, and I'm just abbreviating it there, we're going to have this matrix that's found just outside of this. And I'm just drawing it like this. This network right here, that is the extracellular matrix. So with the connective tissues, the cells are going to have extracellular matrix on the outside, and that extracellular matrix can have different consistencies to it. Okay, so what is the extracellular matrix? This is going to be produced and secreted by the connective tissue cells, and it contains ground substance along with various fibers. Well, ground substance is water plus some adhesion proteins and large charged polysaccharides. And again, the overall consistency that we have with our extracellular matrix is going to vary quite a bit depending on the specific connective cells that we're talking about. It's going to form a soft packaging around some organs, and in other cases, it's going to be very hard, like when we talk about bone. So the matrix ranges from very soft, which we have in fat, and then it also can get very hard, very protective when we're talking about bones. We can classify the connective tissues as bone, cartilage, dense connective tissue, we have loose connective tissue, and then we do also include blood in the connective tissue category. If we take a look at some of these connective tissues, here we have a look at bone, and bone, as you probably are already well aware, is a very hard substance. And the reason why bone is so hard is because this contains a hard matrix that provides exceptional protection and support. And again, it's just about the consistency of the extracellular matrix that is there. So here we can see around these cells that you do have quite a bit of substance around them that's going to give them that hard matrix. Cartilage is a second type of connective tissue. This one is going to have an extracellular matrix that allows it to be flexible. So these cartilage cells or cartilage tissues are going to have abundant collagen there, and the collagen is going to give them a rubbery or a blue appearance to them. Dense connective tissue is going to form strong rope-like structures, and this is tendons and ligaments. Okay, so those are going to kind of tie different body parts together. Loose connective tissue is going to be softer. It has more cells and it has fewer fibers. The fact that it has fewer fibers and more cells is what's going to give it a much softer overall texture. And then when we're talking about blood, blood seems like an odd one to throw into this category here, but we do consider it a connective tissue. It is going to be surrounded by blood plasma. That is the actual matrix, which is why we're putting it in this particular category. A third type of tissue is going to be muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is specialized to be part of our muscles. It is going to produce some movement, and the way that it produces that movement is with its ability to contract and shorten. And so with the contracting and shortening, we'll see the movement. We classify the muscle tissue into three categories. We have skeletal, cardiac, and then also smooth. So if we look at those, the skeletal muscle tissue is going to be attached to the skeleton, and this is something that we are able to move voluntarily. So when we want to, we move it, and then it is going to produce movement of our body. If we're looking at the cells of the skeletal muscular tissue, you do see a lot of striations in it. And by striations, we're talking about the lines that you do see here. Cardiac tissue is only found in the heart. And while you do see some striations in this particular muscle tissue as well, it is different in the overall control. Because where the skeletal muscular tissue was something that we could voluntarily move, so move when we want to, the cardiac muscle tissue is going to be something that moves involuntarily. So we don't control that. It does move on its own, which is a good thing for us because we want our heart to be continuously pumping and continuously moving without us having to think about it. The third type is the smooth muscle tissue. This is going to be found in the walls of hollow organs. So this would be things like the stomach and the uterus, and these are ones that are going to contract quite slowly. And because of their contraction, it's going to allow for propelling or moving substances through the organ, which of course is an important thing that the stomach and the uterus have to do. Our last tissue type is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue has this big function in receiving and conducting electrical impulses, and the main point of that is to allow us to respond to things. So in other words, nervous tissue is capable of irritability and then conductivity. So it can be stimulated and then it transmits that signal. Because of this, some of the cells are really long so that they can stretch over great distances and communicate a signal very, very fast.